Julius Evola spoke on what he called the demonic nature of the economy in his book, Men Among the Ruins. Quote, "This should be firmly upheld by those who today are taking a stand against the forces of the left. Nothing is more evident than that modern capitalism is just as subversive as Marxism. The materialistic view of life on which both systems are based is identical. Both of their ideals are qualitatively identical, including the premises connected to a world, the center of which is constituted of technology, science, production, productivity, and consumption. And as long as we only talk about economic classes, profits, salaries, and production, and as long as we believe that real human progress is determined by a particular system of distribution of wealth and goods, and that generally speaking human progress is measured by the degree of wealth and indulgence, then we are not even close to what is essential, even though new theories beyond Marxism and capitalism might be formulated." End quote. Evola hit on something quite important that was truly a spiritually destructive force of this monomaniacal urge to expand our own economic efficiencies and productive capacities, or even just using the economy as a means to fulfill desire. In the modern world, we are made into but tools to the machine, and where we try to exhibit some separation from it, we are immediately deemed unworthy, in some respect, as we are not using our time as financially efficient as possible. And even at that, we worship time, status, and self over our urge to have a spiritual placement in the world, whether it be an aristocrat, a warrior, or a mailman. The idea of economy worship, however, isn't infinite, and it does have its end. And that is what we are here to analyze today, how the economy functionally will never improve. We will never achieve a grand boom like that of post-World War II or the 1980s and 90s, and how this collapse in productivity will in fact be a good thing. To start off, however, let us analyze our frenemies across the pond who seem to have done the economy worship mistake on overdrive, the People's Republic of China. Rather than making the mistake of being too insular while also trying to expand its economy like the Soviet Union did, they chose to play the global economy game and accepted US dollar financial investment. What people wonder about is how they could do it so well, so quickly, and put simply, it is due to the amount of untilled land, unmined mines, and hopelessly united, efficient bureaucracy they had that allowed for the mania to begin in the 70s. What really helped them, though, was that investment. And they wouldn't have been able to do what they accomplished without access to cheap credit and grubby Western mitts that wanted in on the emerging economy. However, in just a couple generations, though, China has gone from being a backwater, illiterate nation of peasant farmers to one of towering mega-giant manufacturing companies, and had brought people from poverty to riches. They forgot something very important, though. Don't let that Faustian man keep on going. In the light of competition and gaining all the treasure of the global economy, they didn't prepare for the inevitable slowdowns due to the law of diminishing returns, a law which we will elaborate on further in a moment. Now, as China has faced the growing distrust of the global economy post-2008, realizes that they have a shortage of dollars and can't just put tens of millions of unskilled labor to work building useless infrastructure, they've reached a catch-22 where they go full tyrant, controlled collapse, or they keep expanding. The former, which is obviously the much lesser evil, expansion is great while it's happening, but any time a crisis of confidence comes along, which it literally always does, because loose money eras bring about massive judgment crises where people make risky, hasty, bad decisions that blow back in their face when said crisis comes along. This is where China is at. The minute you fall away from the ever-expanding, debt-happy economy for even a second, you're going to have massive issues arise. And who trusts China anymore? The China Hustle documentary really revealed how the Chinese government actively lied about shell companies from 2006 to 2012 that were being put onto the U.S. stock market. About, I think it was 92% of companies that were Chinese put onto, the NYSE were in fact just literally just fake companies with fake balance sheets. They were just lying. And a lot of when some guys who are hated for this went over there to show that this was happening so they could short it and make billions of dollars, well, essentially they stole it from thousands of just normal Americans who were coerced into saving their money in this lie. And for all the controlled demolitions of Evergrande apartment buildings and China's inevitable crisis with needing to acquire funding for their situation ultimately can be represented in the spiritual crisis among many young Chinese people who are a part of the lying flat movement. In Mandarin, Tongping. These young people realize life isn't fulfilling when they trade their culture and a calm life for going to be a doctor and a lawyer. They would rather work at the convenience store to save themselves immense heartache. Notice any similarities with young American men who are going to trade school instead of college? So we have a fantastic example of a nation that speed ran the exact game that we played, and they went from a giant scary foe to a fraudulent Ponzi scheme in a couple of years. But how did that happen? The law of diminishing returns, esoteric, but I'll explain, don't worry. The law of diminishing returns, the Eurodollar, economic efficiency, and the marginal revenue product of debt. If only economists could come up with more exciting, spicy names for these concepts. But put simply, too much debt, too little revenue. The law of diminishing returns is the law of diminishing marginal returns is a theory that explains at a certain point additional investment into something will yield lesser and lesser profit. Why does this happen? Economic efficiency. There is a certain point where something is as efficient and pristine as it can get and can yield no further return while at the same time still providing its purpose. For example, if you were to invest a lot of money into Ford when cars were still a luxury, you'd be a rich man. But as cars have become increasingly efficient to the point where they cannot be improved upon, there is no reason to further invest in improvement that would create massive room for investment to grow, right? Cars are exactly what they need to be at this point. There's no further room for them to grow, other than fantasies of electric cars, which we don't have the infrastructure for and never will. This issue is further exemplified in the actual numbers that reflect a global macroeconomic problem of diminishing returns. Worldwide GDP has been flat in European nations, South America, the entire continent of Africa, Japan, South Korea. The manufacturing capitals of the world that used to rival the U.S., like the EU and Japan, are now well below the U.S. Why is that? Two simple reasons. Debt in 2008. Let's start with the Great Recession. Put simply, the Great Recession wasn't what you think it was. And the reason people don't really understand it is because it's just too esoteric. The Great Recession was a special event because it was the breakdown of confidence in the banking system's collateral market and its ability to function reliably. You know all about mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities that went bad, but it doesn't end there. That was so important in the collateral market that it allowed for the global economy to function with so much liquidity. But since it went sour, there is nothing that can restore confidence to allow the global economy to function reliably again. Simply put, in dumb terms, you had this system of collateral where the big 200 IQ fellas at banksters could make deals, right? They could be like, well, here's a mortgage-backed security. It's completely full of bullshit debt, but we're going to pretend it's legit. That's what Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns did. And one thing I will side with the Jay Powells of the world on is that that system was never saved because we didn't save Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. And so when you allow those two giants to collapse, all banks are thinking about is next time this falls apart, which it will, because they don't have the system they used to have, where there was a lot of trust. Well, they don't want to hold this shitty collateral, so you don't get economic investment. But there is another layer of this. There's a giant U.S. dollar-denominated debt problem around the world. This unhelpfully is known as the Eurodollar crisis. Eurodollars are just U.S. dollars, but outside of the United States, outside of the regulatory reach of the Fed and the SEC. I would rather people call them rogue dollars. That would make more sense. But again, economists. The Fed likes you to think that they have control over the money supply, but they don't. The majority of dollars, something like 55% of them, are outside of the U.S. So what happens when you have nations that have built all this debt pre and post 2008 and expected it to make them into the next Japan of the 70s and 80s, but really just led them on a path to inevitably become Zimbabwe. Well, what you get is what we have now, a giant economic stagnation problem, and what I would call the most long drawn-out depression we have ever seen in American history. Since 2008, we were never able to get back on track to the economic expansion we were supposed to achieve. Not only that, but Jeff Snyder of Alhambra Research estimates that the real mean salary, which is $55,000 about right now, should be up somewhere near $75,000. What Japan has done in the wake of their own diminishing returns era, where their GDP has stagnated for 30 years, is deficit spend and implement failure after failure central bank edict. Most people will wonder why this has failed to induce inflation, but has been successful here. But they're wrong. We have had growth in the 20 teens, albeit not where we had pre-2008, nor has lending been that high either. And it led to such inflation. In Japan, they've had no growth. Why? They amassed too much debt and reached the point where they can't go any further, economic efficiency. This is why, and I must demystify this myth, quantitative easing and the open market operations by the Fed is actively deflationary because it removes liquidity from the system. Whenever you see a headline that says the Fed is buying $100 billion of treasuries, what's really happening is they're removing treasuries, the liquidity of the system. The system really needs treasuries to keep doing these, allowing the blood of the financial system to run, to flow. They're actively removing that and giving banks something called central bank reserves, which is in the banking system, that is how they create bank deposits. They loan it out based on that. But banks don't want that because they don't want to loan to anybody. On the face of it, most people who just see the headline or watch a Peter Schiff video will think we're on the brink of hyperinflation. But fear not, he's trying to sell you a gold fund. So when we have a minimal inflation in the 20 teens without the same credit growth, wage growth, growth in manufacturing, while debt has continued to grow, it wasn't due to the Fed persistently putting its foot in its mouth and doing actions that actively either did nothing for the economy in the long term or changed short-term interest rates in the short term. Don't worry, it'll get interesting. This was very similar to what Japan has ultimately done for the last 30 years, where their GDP has been flat. Look up GDP per capita of the globe. It's been flat. Most people think we will just jubilee the debtors. Just get rid of it. Free college, free healthcare, whatever. They'll print money. What they don't realize is debt is not some piece of paper, some nebulous abstract concept in the ether of another dimension. It is a promise. So if we do not fulfill our promises, but are made whole, that leaves an entire economy that not only doesn't trust itself, but doesn't want to lend to anyone. In this exact environment, the government would implement the central bank digital currency. But I just don't see that happening because it solves none of their problems, while simultaneously getting much more powerful people angry at them. Sorry, politicians have less combined power than Jamie Dimon does and his left pinky. But see, you can go read my Substack article on government debt and trade deficits. The U.S. government is obliged to deficit spend so it can create these treasuries. Ever since 2008, this security, U.S. government debt, has been the collateral of the entirety of the global finance. What the entirety of global finance wants in order to make their deals. That is why if we stop deficit spending, then there's less collateral. Therefore, the rest of the world and us have a solvency issue. But if we keep deficit spending, we will encounter the problem that creates an enormous misallocation of resources, and guess what? Diminishing returns. There's only so much infrastructure that we can build before it becomes too much to maintain. This is the issue that John Michael Greer wrote about in his paper, How Civilizations Fall, A Theory of Catabolic Collapse. I'm hot. I'm going to do this. Where he illustrated a broad explanation for how civilizations not only just face crisis, but completely obliterate themselves out of nowhere. Simply, when you develop too much infrastructure, it must be maintained. And that not only includes physical public infrastructure, but infrastructure of education, of government, of hierarchies, of bureaucracies, etc. Once you create way more than your pocketbook can handle, you've either got to do one of two things: conquer or tax someone else to pay for it, or destroy the excess infrastructure. Now, who does that? As you can imagine, most cultures seem to do the former much more than the latter, which is why there are so many ancient civilizations whose haplogroups and languages have an unmarked grave in history. We are at a crossroads economically. The system that holds the banking system together is broken, as I just autistically explained with all the annoying words that nobody cares about. Most people have to take on undefaultable debt to get a job that isn't flipping burgers. The average person's sense of meaning is founded in cheap Chinese goods that they are going to see less and less of as we are in the winter. Mm-hmm. And all the grand promises our boomer grandparents made seem to have been nothing but a phantasm. But there is a saving grace that I am actively encouraged by: this organic, synchronized drive towards creating sustainable, traditional communities. This, I believe, will solve every economic problem that faces the human race as we recover from our Faustian folly. A lot of people here probably aren't big fans of Karl Marx and his pal Friedrich Engels. But the two fellows were extremely spot on about what this free market capitalist worship ends up becoming. At a certain point, the high finance who has control over all of the liquidity, along with their cronies who are in government and their cronies who are in the corporations, all benefit regardless of how the political ebbs and flows move. So the banksters seem to always win until they don't, when people get really mad at them and you have a regime change. But essentially, you reach these eras where capital is wholly owned by very few, whereas more modest times, when everyone kind of has an equal shot at benefiting from the new economic expansions and credit expansions, it's at the end of these expansions that everyone is getting footed, like 1929. That brings me to the concept of the Pareto efficiency as well, where any change in the system to benefit one individual or group will hurt another individual or group. Ironic, the regime now is normalizing that oppression rather than accepting we cannot sustain a system that actively steals from the normative and well-adjusted and gives to criminals and those who are on the dole. It's eras like this where we all come to some synchronic understanding that it can't continue, and actively search without even the coercion of another to find something different and more meaningful. Nonetheless, we've hit all very important points that are material to understanding the unstoppable problem of this busted economy. But we must hit on one last point, and the most important one, before we understand why this brokenness is actually a good thing. In 2019 and 2020, I had gotten very privy to the Austrian School of Economics, and being in that persuasion of how the market works and how resources are allocated, you accept two very libertarian ideas that become inseparable from logic, and rightfully so. One, no, we all function based on self-interest. Now, that just, obviously we all understand the spirituality of that. That is wrong. Economically, it's spot on. Number two, and this is more important, the function of government is actively destructive to the creative and productive capacity of the individual. Now, I am not here to preach Rothbardian libertarianism, because that is most certainly not how I see things. As I've said in the past, I take more of an Ernst Junger approach to power, where I am the libertarian that appreciates and understands why I need authority and authoritarians. However, when I came across videos like George Gammon, the Macro Voices, and many deflationist economists, I happened upon a treasure trove of underestimated and misunderstood wisdom that they have on how money works. One of them specifically, above the rest, is Lacey Hunt. What I appreciate about these Chicago school types is their proclivity towards analysis rather than something concrete. In addition, I am not someone who believes the whims of power are all that effective on the open and free market that has allowed for so much debt to be produced, dollars that are untrackable, debt that is created when some other bank in another country loans to a corporation in dollars, and oh shit, now there's more dollar debt. Can't control that. So So I take an unorthodox approach and do not see where any school has a definitive universal approach to economics. Maybe that's why it's called the dismal science, and experiences many changes as we go through unique economic dilemmas. There are no solutions, only trade-offs, as Thomas Sowell would say. Lacey Hunt pointed out a very interesting problem that puts this entire macroeconomic dilemma on its highest volume: the marginal revenue product of debt, MRPD. This is the revenue stream that debt creates. From 1870 until the crash of 1929, the MRPD was 0.8 to 0.58 until the crash brought it down to 0.4 for a few years. That means we went from producing 80 cents for every dollar of debt created to 58 cents before the crash, and to about 40 cents during and after the crash. Well, World War II ends, and it skyrockets again. Debt becomes cheaper and looser, and we start producing more as a country. And the MRPD domestically rises to its highest it's ever been in recorded history, above 80 cents per dollar. And this was falling, but quite flat until the 1980s, about 1987, actually, when one of the biggest stock market crashes in history happened. This has fallen to a pitiful 0.38, but when you take into account financial debt and not just government or household debt, the number is at a record low of 0.23. That means for every dollar of debt created in the U.S., only 23 cents of value is actually added to the economy, and that just keeps going down. It's been going down since the 80s. Why is this? Well, let's analyze the velocity of money and how it continues to fall. Since 2000, the velocity of M2 money, let's just say money, has fallen from a high of 2.19 in Q3 of 1997 to a record low of 1.115 in Q3 of 2021. This simply means people are spending less, as the velocity, which is the rate at which money circulates through the economy, has fallen 50%, which it had been rather stable for several decades before. What this tells us is something really quite simple. There is too much debt in the economy that was produced too quickly, and therefore people can no longer use any discretionary income they would have because it is being spent on debt repayment. The average college student, when their debt isn't in forbearance like right now, and for the past 2 years, the ultimate can kick that our government's been doing, the average student debt payment is $300 a month. That's $3,600 a year, $130,000 to $180,000 over the span of their working life that they're just doing paying down their debt. Now, topple this fact of too much dollar-denominated debt across the world, the consequences that actual money printing or debt forgiveness jubilee would cause, surprise, surprise, people like Jay Powell know this would be a disaster. The unrealistic notion that we will have anything close to a central bank digital currency, like China does, and actually have it work, which it hasn't really worked in China. Countless examples of central banks failing to produce inflation, corporate debt at massive highs and their profit margins thin, and the global GDP per capita it being flat, which had been rising from 1960 to 2011. And we are in for a different economic regime that no one else has ever really experienced. Maybe except for those who lived through the Bronze Age collapse. You can't just build bridges to nowhere like the Japanese, or ghost cities like China to feign growth. You need to allocate your productivity to actual productive endeavors. But we simply don't have the need or capacity for it in a diminishing returns economy. And unfortunately, the out that many of us think the Fed and the US government would do to fix this issue, print money literally, but that wouldn't solve the issue, and they know that. Likewise, the CBDC would be a logistical nightmare that would only have to somehow not get the many banksters who all have the power than them, that have more power than them, privy to the idea, which ultimately that would just lead to like some really cool badass future where you just have the CEOs of JP Morgan and Bank of America like hiring paramilitaries to take over the US government. So banks being yeah, because you're basically just taking away their power and handing it over to Janet Yellen. So have fun with that. There's a reason they aren't sending stimmy checks all willy-nilly, or passing bills left and right to get people doing useless make work. Maybe they'll do it if they're still in power as people realize that the economy is in shambles, but I don't think they'll have the infrastructure, inclination, or time to be thinking about a civilian conservation Corps 2.0. The issue of diminishing returns extends elsewhere in our lives as well, from art to culture to technology to relationships and romance. The same aspects of life that make it so saturated with meaning are seemingly flattening out. We no longer have the same risk capital allocated to cultural endeavors that make us feel united as an American people. So consequentially, we are divided as a people, especially as technology amplifies our differences. It isn't that culture is dead or that we are cultureless, but we have simply fallen away from fate and chosen a technological purgatory. But that just goes along with the diminishing returns effect. Technology itself has faced massive diminishing returns, where an old computer might cost you thousands of dollars in the 1980s and millions back in the 1960s. A new computer that plays your games and allows you to do work and school assignments is but a few $100s now. A television that would cost you a year's salary in 1970, be extremely heavy, and have a 16-inch screen is now 32 inches, lighter than a feather, does more than just scan a few channels, and costs even someone who makes minimum wage a very reasonable amount. Now, how does this stay profitable? Other than if you have a tight margin, your labor is all in the third world, and you use cheap parts. Well, it doesn't. At a certain point, something will give in a crisis of confidence situation like we had in 2008. Except what I foresee happening being a little bit more of a drawn-out process, if anything, because it's simply a massive debt problem. Perhaps it may be reckoned with. Brent Johnson of Santiago Capital has a famous or infamous, depending on what your favorite narrative is, explanation of how this will play out. He calls it the dollar milkshake theory. Milkshake, there will be blood, drainage, I drink your milkshake. Where at some point, the dollar milkshake theory at some point, due to a lack of growth, high dollar denominated debt, and deteriorating faith, not only among trust between international relations, but also in the banking system, will bring to fruition a domino effect scenario where many nations will need dollar funding, won't be able to get it, and will be on their hands and knees at the U.S.'s door seeking dollars, just like many of them did in March 2020 when the DXY spiked. Or like El Salvador did in early 2021 when they weren't able to get a IMF loan. It's funny because AA brought that up recently about an IMF loan is always attached to a nation that's about to fall apart. Well, they couldn't get the loan, and so they did plan B. They said, let's just gamble on Bitcoin. And that's what they did, and it all didn't work out too well. Nonetheless, this theory of dollar shortage and dollar apocalypse are what I see as being cross currents or even indirect harbingers of what will lead to a much healthier lifestyles among Westerners. Well, certain Westerners. I don't mean just eating meat and drinking milk healthy, though. I mean it will bring about an orientation towards community because all of us will be poorer. All of us. There literally isn't wealth to be spread around. So even the rich will be trying to hold on to every last penny, much like the Great Depression. But this collapse is simply worse, much worse, due to the reasons I laid out: technological singularity, basically, economic efficiency. Have fun building spaceships to Mars when you have a 80% overweight population. And I mean, come on, the pause is not going to get that accomplished, at least that's for sure. Lost my part. So it isn't, it isn't just a bunch of consumer debt going bad and people going broke. It's literally the entire system that makes the global economy run so efficiently collapsing. It's as simple as that. It's a very simple concept. You can't keep they don't have the means to produce the collateral, the bullshit collateral they had before 2008. So they can't have these, quick deals. So no faith. Everything runs on faith. So, this collapse in an economy we thought would boom may depress some, but I see it as a reason to be excited. Why? Because it will spur growth and resourcefulness and favor intelligent and hardy men to rise from the ashes. People who are weak do extremely well in loose money eras because they don't have to try hard. They can get the debt they need, the jobs that they want, and live relatively simple lives, albeit in excess. However, in hard times, when they have to think on their feet about how they can make a little extra dough and realize that Uber isn't the most reliable way to make side income, Smarter people will seek out constructive trades and crafts, and not only that, even if they aren't making money from their craft, they will do it to make their life cheaper to benefit themselves. Likewise, those who live in the country or band together with like-minded, trustworthy friends and family will accomplish much more than those of the low-trust, high-crime cities, who know nothing other than the rut they're stuck in. This is why when I already see a clear rise in the amount of more trad, anti-tech families who are raising their kids right, with a spiritual upbringing, I can't help but realize it isn't just a fad, but a burgeoning trend. It's why the number of homeschooled students has skyrocketed from a few thousand in the mid-20th century to 5 million now in America. People want to separate from this broken, decadent world that they were lied to about. Even more so, they're tired of the damn noise. The trend is being set. As white flight continues, a new culture is forming, the cities are being left behind in a Sodom and Gomorrah-like fashion. As more decent people realize that a rural communal life is more preferred, not just for the ease of mind and for the safety of their kids, but for the tranquility it brings to their soul. This is why, in the wake of all of this, as we end the fourth turning and the end of the secular cycle of Anglo-American history, I think we must realize what we are bound for and what seeds we must sow in the fertile ground of tomorrow. I've made the point before that we aren't really a country anymore, but a very loose economic confederation of anti-culture cities where in between one can still find traces of the soul of America and of Dixie. But this is not a nation, simply because it is atomized and it won't ever be united again, because it is jam-packed with foreign cultures, decadent city folk who prefer their consumerism over their soul. In order to create something better, I, and I think many of us here, want to see the creation of our own loose confederation, our own culture, our own remedy of being given a rotten carcass of a nation to reap rewards from. That's why with the basket weavers, with this conference, with the ties we have to one another, we must create something in place of the broken world. And it truly started yesterday. I'm not sure where we are bound, but I have faith that God will lead us in a direction that is meaningful. Buy land, create your own communities, and revolt against the modern world, because I feel it is unnecessary to construct a giant Leviathan in place of the old one. This is where I find myself diverging from other rightists, even though I sympathize with their cause and know where they are coming from. I find it ultimately a useless venture to be angrily trying to chip away or take over a system that never did them any good. What good is it to usurp the enemy when they are your enemy for a reason? They suck at doing things that you know you could do better. Well, I do find it appropriate and even pertinent to establish some more powerful force that would protect us, possibly from within the Leviathan. I still see no use it would do in the long term. They may send in a Fed or two, but who gives a damn? Welcome the Feds in. What are they going to do? Tell their lesbian boss how you said homosexuality was a sin? Or took your kids out to go play without masks on? As long as we keep a level head and know we are impenetrable, as long as Jesus Christ is our number one king, we really have no way to lose. We understand our enemy for who they truly are. They aren't competent. They don't have a system of trust. They aren't spiritual. They aren't even happy. They're a giant bureaucracy of overweight losers who want to draw a pension as early as possible. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble who thinks there's this heated war between the pious and the righteous. Unfortunately, the game won't be that hard, in my opinion. The only thing getting in the way of our success is those who are overly pessimistic, those who second guess, people who rabble-rouse. The answer is simply our goal: God, community, and culture. And these can be succeeded as humanly possible. So do not keep worshiping the economy. Don't even want to replace it. Don't keep thinking line-go-upism is integral to our goal, that the reins of the Leviathan must be grabbed so the bees can be tamed. But understand the death of this decadence is already underway, and all you have to do is shun it. Anglo Ortho made a good point about the ocean and dancing for rain. It's already happening. So shun the sin, separate yourself from it. I'm not saying it'll be easy, nor am I saying we won't have people who want to tear it down, but what I'm saying is don't be paranoid and resentful. Rather, look forward to forming a better future for your family. The odds are in our favor. And as the global economy continues to shatter and future economic prospects are torn apart domestically and foreign, wise people of our nation will start developing useful skills In doing so, they will keep dollars from leaving the U.S. and staying among our own people, our own domestic industry. In doing so, we will create a more reliable future for future generations rather than being reliant upon something foreign. This will financially screw over the rest of the world, and your life will be a lot more expensive. Yes, and it will screw over the rest of the world. This will only allow fate to run its course for them a lot quicker, and for other nations to settle disputes that they must. It's none of our business, ultimately. What we must focus on is our own brothers and sisters. That's the interesting thing about what this stagnatory economy that a lot of other nations are in, where especially Europe. You look at Sweden, one of the most depressing things you can do is just look up like GDP from manufacturing of any European country and just watch it after like 2008. It's kind of rough, because imagine living before that time when you expected all this growth to happen and it just disappeared right in front of your eyes. I truly feel that this drive towards constructing industry for ourselves is around the corner if we want it bad enough, if we want community bad enough, to work for one another bad enough. If we don't, we are bound towards a long drawn-out collapse, where you may even get your hyperinflation, as the failure of the last bits of meritocracy we have left in our government fails to lead to a CBDC, central bank digital currency. It starts with events like this, where we keep together as a brotherhood who is unbreakable. Regardless of our own little petty disputes, we have a responsibility to construct a better tomorrow. So get to it, gents. And I'd like to end, because I like poetry. I'm going to end with my favorite poem. The Calf Path. The Calf Path by Sam Walter Foss. One day through the primeval wood, a calf walked home, as good calves should, but made a trail all bent askew, a crooked trail, as all calves do. Since then, 300 years have fled, and I infer the calf is dead, but still he left behind his trail, and thereby hangs my moral tale. The trail was taken up next day by a lone dog that passed the way, and then a wise bellwether sheep pursued the trail over vale and steep, and drew the flock behind him too, as good bellwethers always do. And from that day, over hill and glade, through those old woods a path was made, and many men wound in and out, and dodged and turned and bent about, and uttered words of righteous wrath, because 'twas such a crooked path, but still they followed, do not laugh, the first migrations of that calf. And through this winding woodway stalked, because he wobbled when he walked. This forest path became a lane that bent and turned again. This crooked lane became a road, where many a poor horse with his load toiled on beneath the burning sun, and traveled some 3 miles in one. And thus a century and a half they trod in the footsteps of that calf. The years passed on in swiftness fleet. The road became a village street, and this before men were aware, a city's crowded thoroughfare. And soon the central street was this, of a renowned metropolis. And men 2 centuries and a half trod in the footsteps of that calf. Each day, 100,000 rout followed the zigzag calf about, and over his crooked journey went the traffic of a continent. 100,000 men were led by one calf near 3 centuries dead. They followed still his crooked way, and lost 100 years a day. For thus such reverence is lent to well-established precedent. A moral lesson this might teach, were I ordained and called to preach, for men are prone to go it blind along the calf paths of the mind, and work away from sun to sun to do what other men have done. They follow in the beaten track, and out and in and forth and back, and still their devious course pursue, to keep the path that others do. They keep the path a sacred groove, along for which all their lives they move. But how the wise old wood gods laugh, who saw that first primeval calf. Many things this tale might teach, but I am not ordained to preach. Thank you, everybody. Question time.
I got an easy question about trading money, like I mentioned earlier
Yes, ma'am.
today. I'm trying to get people in my local holler to get used to trading and bartering stuff together, and I'm trying to set up a trading post on my property.
Yes.
When and if that day comes, like in the decay and the
Yes.
ever worsening collapse, should we still trade the U.S. dollar?
So the U.S. dollar,
Or should we try to focus on just moving away from it entirely as
yeah.
fast as possible?
So something I've been saying a lot lately is how this is a very simple concept to think about: is high trust societies lead to high rate of debt issuance. Right, so if you think about early America, I mean, especially in Christian societies, right, Christianity fosters the most high trust societies possible. So what ends up happening is you have, hey, I'm going to loan you out some money, but come on, dude, better pay it back. And he'll be like, okay, well, shit, this is a good Christian man, and I want to show that I'm worth something. I'm going to go work and build something with this, and that's how you get a million fucking skyscrapers in a matter of 30 years. Right, East Tennessee is fantastic, much better than where I am in Central Texas. More salt of the earth people, but yeah, what will end up happening is the dollar at some point will reach. So think about what I love is the MRPD, marginal revenue product of debt. It's at 23 cents. So if it just keeps going to zero, where debt just no longer has value, I mean the dollar just won't have value at a certain point. It has to come, due to the low trust throughout the world, it has to fall at some point. And I think, unless I'll be real here, gold will probably take over. But it really is just a matter of preference of whatever your town is. I think ultimately, this is where I like Peter Schiff is in one of his books. I think it was The Real Crash. He explained how gold became real money. How societies just were like, there's literally just no one understands why it's money. It really is just we all think it's pretty. Mesoamerican civilizations use it as money. West African ones did. China used silver, but I think ultimately they used gold. Europe. So it's just. I think ultimately we'll go back to hard money because we're going into the low trust era. So there isn't an ability to create fiat currency. So maybe it would be interesting to start using gold or silver.
Well, I mean, I'm open to that, of course, but
yes.
just for me and my mountain hauler,
yes.
Right now, the people that I'm trying to get into this, just trading chickens and mayonnaise and the things
That's
that
great.
That we can do, preserves, and just getting everybody used to swapping together is the first step.
Yes.
But when I get to that step, should we just keep it at swapping stuff and trading? Because do you think that would be wiser? What
I think right now is really interesting is this idea of keeping dollars within our own little La Cosa Nostra thing, right?
Okay.
Just keep it among ourselves. So if we have dollars that we can give to someone else who makes, like for instance, my buddy made this belt. I love him. I wish he had a website, but Red Iron, he's a great guy, but I would rather give him money and then he holds it. He gives someone else money in this economy, and it stays among us.
Okay.
So I think that would be awesome. But for now, yeah, because we're almost winning in that sense.
Yeah.
Because now the dollars aren't going anywhere else,
Okay.
right? So.
Well, thank you for the answer. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Mr. Carson.
Hey, so yeah, you hit on a point I've been trying to preach on my channel for a while, which is you're not too worried about China, right?
Yes,
And
sir.
That's been a place where I've been in disagreement with a lot of other right-wing people who are
You're very afraid
of China.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of my argument, I think you pretty much implicitly said it, is that I sort of see a parallel. I'm old enough to remember when Japan was the scary thing.
Yes.
In the 90s, right?
Yes.
They figured out how to do public-private partnerships, and they're going to crush us forever. And yeah.
Yes.
And then they went into a slump forever.
Forever.
For decades, right?
Yes.
And it seems to me China's rather parallel
Mm-hmm.
with, I don't know if both of these things are parallel, but too much debt, too much infrastructure,
Yes.
right? In
Yes.
both cases.
Yes.
Yeah, so anyway, just thrilled that you made that point.
Thank you.
I want to make sure everybody doesn't miss it.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think you're kind of addressing it, but then
Mm-hmm.
I guess the general thinking is the U.S. is not going to go down the path of Japan and China because the U.S. dollar is the global reserve currency.
Yes.
And therefore, we're in a special category, right?
Well, for now.
And then
Yeah.
Black Horse on my channel has been teaching us that after 2008, they started doing all this crazy stuff, right? Literally
Huey.
like buying stock of companies. To
Oh,
keep-
Japan. Yeah.
No,
Oh.
I'm talking about the
We
US.
we buy ETFs.
Post
Right.
2008,
We've been Treasury ETFs.
Treasury will just
Exactly. Yeah.
buy stuff
Right.
to keep it from slumping, right? The idea being that we're not going to get a decline anymore because between the Fed and the Treasury, now they have all the instruments to
So
stop a bust from happening. Anyway, I don't believe this. I'm just trying to make the case for how the U.S. is not going to follow the Japan and then China path in decline. And just some thoughts on that.
That's fantastic, actually. I mean, I've heard that. I think that point is probably accurate, but okay, so here's the thing. I think what really the real effect, because I guess my divergence with a lot of people lately is I don't think the government has any effect on the real economy or where money goes, because it's really institutional money, and where does institutional money go? It's the safe havens. And sure, you have BlackRock. They throw a little money at housing so they can just prepare for maybe a secular inflationary event, or they'll throw a 0.0001% at GameStop for the sake of it. You know, I think they make those choices, but ultimately, the big thing that has fueled like asset prices just blowing up in every aspect of the economy is boomer money. Boomer money seems to, because America does have a lot of people who are extraordinarily rich, and I think when you have this horribly kerfuffled supply chain, I mean, it's like, I know somebody who they got hit recently in their car, and they couldn't find like the basic like hatchback door, and it's stuff like that will push prices up, but there isn't the money in, like, among us especially, to actually fuel a discretionary, or we don't have the discretionary income like we used to actually fuel this constant velocity in keeping asset prices pushed up. I actually think it's an anomaly, and maybe it goes on for a long time, but I think the Fed ultimately, they haven't bought. So, for instance, I'll counter Mr. Blackhorse's point. I don't know if he's made it or someone else did, about someone once said that, you know, oh, they bought stocks, but they bought a few, like 75 billion. I don't think they put all of the money they said they would into buying stocks. But how much money goes through the NYSE alone in one day that's traded? It's like 140 billion. It's an insane amount of money. The Fed, what I believe, now a lot of people again diverge with me on this, is the Fed really, what they do is just expectations policy. So I think it doesn't matter what they do.
It's like AA says, it's all about propaganda.
Yes,
spin.
it's a propaganda wing. It's really funny, dude.
Yeah, so you would separate sort of the real economy from the games they play, and eventually reality will manifest.
Exactly, and
what you're saying.
that's really scary, because you have so many people who are really piled up. Like, the stock market actually hasn't even been doing well lately. I mean, I love Jesse Livermore, who best stock trader ever lived. He said, you know, it was very simple, dude. You never trade a choppy market. You either trade in a bull market or a bear market. You long, and you don't buy at the bottom. Oh, I'm going to get early on this stock. No, you buy when it's going up. Literally, that's all he said. Buy when it's going up, sell when it's going. It's so simple, but people still think they're geniuses, and that they've fucking pulled something out of their ass and said, oh, actually, it's this. The market's it's as old as the hills. Speculation is as old as the hills, but yeah, I think it is separate. I think the Fed may push up asset prices through expectations, and I think we all agree ultimately it's going to end in a bigger disaster when it comes back to the mean, like it always does.
Right.
Jacob.
So, the euro dollar or rogue dollar problem is that, do you have any data that suggests that, like, it's essentially like money printers, they're printing money out of our control that is new issuance of debt, that just on trust that they can get it back, right? So is there any evidence that you have this is accelerating, or like there's coming to a head on this particular problem where there's going to be a major issue where it spikes up to like 90% of the fake dollars that are out there are outside of our control?
Right. So that's a beautiful question, man. I haven't even really thought about that. So I think the real big issue is, and this is why I really like Jeff Snyder, because he's not a collapse guy like I am. But Jeff Snyder will just be like, we've been so far from the 2008 going up. Like I love his graphs. They're always scary, and they really just explain the problem right then and there. Sometimes some esoteric language, but it'll just show, oh, this is what the GDP and this is what, or rather lending, what the lending rate, which says the economy is good. We're lending a lot of money and people are paying it back. It was just going up steady, like almost exponentially, and then it goes on. But the fact that we went away from this mean, or from this trend line, shows that there was all this growth that was supposed to happen that isn't. And then you elaborate it to the to Europe, to Japan, all these nations that, like Japan does deficit spend. A lot of these nations, they're in the same issue where they have to keep their population busy with make work, basically. And yeah, I think the ultimate issue is the fact they don't have the revenue stream to pay off the debt. And what I've argued is the best answer to all of these problems is if we all, and this is just not going to happen, but it's, libertarians like the dream, right, is ultimately it would be nice if governments would just tax the shit out of everybody for like 50 years and pay off all this debt, stop issuing money, and go through this long depression that we need, because if you don't, you get into that collapse scenario where you have way too much infrastructure. John Michael Greer, I really like the examples he used, because he uses Rome. That's always the best example for shit hitting the fan is Rome. But also Mayan cultures. He showed how they would go through this cycle from about 180 to like 1000 AD. They went through like 3 clear collapse situations where you can see all this excess infrastructure they built that no longer needed anything. But that breeds bandits. Just look at a city. Just look how the city's built. Look at how highways, they were supposed to, like Robert Moses, he built these highways in New York City. Beforehand, they were perfectly fancy areas, but once you build a highway, it's a permanently impoverished area for many reasons. And so that's essentially what we've done, for decades now in this economy throughout the world. So I don't think we're going to be creating much debt. And all of the money is in government debt. So it's not, the issue isn't that we're going into consumer debt, because actually household debt isn't as bad as it used to be like before 2008. People don't take on debt or spend like they used to, because they just can't. It's the same reason like a lot of women are working when they really should be at home taking care of the kids. So I think ultimately the issue is stagnation. And that's the scariest thing.
Right.
Who the fuck wants to live in stagnation? I'd rather have the collapse,
So
get to it.
Not necessarily accelerate.
Right, it won't accelerate, it's more, and I think ultimately the issue is thinking about it, is government spending in those nations will ultimately, it will have that Ricardian equivalence effect where you're taking away actively from the economy to spend on dipshit government programs. So it's either you're taking it from wealth from the future to supposed wealth from the future to pay for it now, or you're taxing someone and at some point they're just going to leave, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Interesting. I don't understand economy basically at all. I'm going to fix that right away.
It's okay. Red Live is good, yes.
But I have had an amazing experience with this wonderful disruptive technology. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's cryptocurrency. So what are the dangers going forward with cryptocurrency, especially like seeing it as some sort of like out from the central bank system?
Out. So I'm glad someone brought up that's the question that needs to be asked, right? Is crypto. Everybody, it's such a hot topic, and it continues to be. It hasn't been a fad. It has continued to be on people's minds. Like, what the fuck is this? Can this be our out? Right? So I think so we have to ask the question: what is crypto? It's not money. It is a mode for you to store your wealth in an unstable way, but still, you can store it in a way where now, literally, like Milton Friedman. I love Milton Friedman. He brought up the point. Someone asked him in an interview in 1999, when I was born. He asked, in 10 years, will the government be more? Will it be bigger or smaller? And Milton Friedman said, smaller. And then the guy asked, Peter Robinson, he asked, well, are your ideas winning? And he's like, no. It's just the internet will make it easier for people to avoid taxes. And he's fucking right. And what's funny is I think Bitcoin was made in 2009. But that's essentially what's happening is, oh my God, if you're on Twitter, follow the whale alert. Because the whale alert, it shows you all of this money that's circulating. Like literally, I saw $1 billion. Someone just transferred it from their wallet to an exchange. Oh, okay, $1 billion. Wonder who the fuck that was. But it hides your wealth. So I don't think it's money at this point. But the answer is crypto backed by gold. I think that would be actually you have. So this is just fantasy. I still think, you know, you won't. Who knows what the future looks like? But if you want hard money, that is separate from the central banking system, because the central banking system only works if you can print money literally and save the banks like we should have. If you can't do that, which we didn't, well, yeah, go back to the hard money thing, because it doesn't look like fiat's ever going to work, at least in our lifetimes. So I think that'd be great, honestly, some kind of like crypto that is. It's again, I don't know. I'm not smart enough to understand how you would create that, but if it could be at a stagnant price based on gold, then like an ounce of gold or whatever being 25 gold coin or whatever, that would be I think an answer in a way.
Well, so the thing is in the crypto sphere, you have they kind of a whole bunch of them are magical, actually.
I know, yeah.
And the idea
I've had some
of,
autistic debates.
Well, the idea of having it backed by gold actually it's been done, all right?
Oh, I know, yeah.
And it's not had too much success.
Okay.
But
Why? It's not being used as money. I mean, it's ultimately just being used to hide your wealth. That's what people use
yes,
crypto
it's
for.
literally, and for the record, guys, Bitcoin doesn't hide your wealth. It's public that you purchased it. It's on Know Your Customer Exchange. They know who owns it, all right? For the most part. Especially now. So don't think
Damn,
it's
so
like,
it's
don't
worse
think
than
it's
I
a
thought.
tax evasion scheme, because it's not. If you want it, have that.
I think I know what you're talking about, and well, no, it's you can hide it if it's not on an exchange.
Yes.
Right. So don't buy it on an exchange. Don't put it on an exchange. Have the wallet number, whatever. Have people do that. But that's the alternative, right? Don't have an exchange that is literally obliged,
Right.
to show the government where your money. So.
And one of my friends hypothesis is that we're going to be able to take crypto. It's a disruptive technology, yes, but ultimately it's not the answer. His answer to it is we're going to use this. We're going to use it to build wealth. We're going to use it to do entrepreneurial stuff, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take that and exit out of the system, just exactly like you said. And I think that's correct.
So,
What we should do with it.
you know what I thought about is this is an original thought, but maybe someone else has had it. But I thought about it in my little brain is. If you went on, say, well, like, and this is not what we're talking about, but say you have a Bitcoin standard or some kind of crypto standard, well, guess what just happened? Now you have like 10 guys who own most of it, and you don't even know who the fuck they are. And, well, now they're the secret central bankers of this system, so that's kind of like worse than a central bank. But in terms of like keeping your wealth, so ultimately our mission is exit from the system, being away from the pause, and yeah, if you can use crypto to your advantage, let's do it, man. I mean, that's what we need.
I have something.
All right, I dig it.
So I know nothing about economics, my brain doesn't work that way, but I have this understanding that numbers that we use to gauge economic health really kind of epistemologically frame the conversation, and I feel that for the last 100 years we've been kind of changing this notion of GDP. And I think what we really should be talking about is some minimum income for a family, right?
Yes.
A family income threshold fit, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, what is some aggregate way of measuring, what is the amount of income you need to have to get, to be reasonably able to
That
raise a
changes.
family? And this could be a way of both macrocosmically measuring the health of the country and also the community. And it's also something that you can manifestly see in a community of any size. You can just do a poll and see exactly where this is. And like things like childcare, community meals, like that would manifestly lower this number. So I was just going to ask you, what do you think about trying to change the numbers we're looking at?
Yeah. So everyone likes to point at like Bhutan with they're like no more GDP. It's about measuring the happiness, and that's actually, people would be like whatever, cuck, but like that's legit. I mean, why wouldn't you want to like let's go ask our people. Hopefully he's not a tyrant, which it would be skewed, but like hey, how happy are you? What you need? Like figure out what the issue is with your people. That's a king, right? That's a real king. And I think where we diverge from the like free market capitalist worship, or free market economy worship rather, in this like ability to bring out happiness and meaning, you know, it's nonsense. And you know, it's funny, Milton Friedman, he wanted to have a minimum income. He was, you know, this hardcore libertarian, but that was something he was in favor of. And you know, it's something George Friedman brought up. Friedman? Is it Friedman? George Friedman? Yeah. Brought up in the next 100 years, where he's like, the price of a family, of having a family, keeps going up due to all the legal obligations we have in our country and well, diminishing returns now. So raising a family has become, it's become more expensive, but I mean, honestly, it's become expensive because Americans like to spend and spend their money on dumb shit. And if you were more conservative about what you spend your money on, I mean, people can make this work. Like I have a friend whose wife, him and his wife are coming to this like conclusion, like you need to stay home, and they're going to have a tighter income, but it's better, and I mean, like, good for them. Yeah, we need to stop analyzing GDP. We need to stop looking at the lines, because when you start getting infatuated about lines, you stop you stop looking at God for answers to things. You start being like, well, why? Like, it's ironic, that's what I've been doing. GDP per capita, for instance, like that's just been flat since 2011 throughout the entire world. So we're starting to realize, like, we had 100 years of like almost the Faustian man to the highest degree, but now it's almost, there's this different paradigm we have to shift into where, yeah, you said it yourself, Dave. We need to start analyzing what, you know, what's more meaningful, rather than just like, well, I need to get a house by the time I'm 24 so I can, you know, brag about it to whoever and have this nice new shiny thing, whatever. I think people are past that.
Time for Trumpton, right?
And you know, I will say too, you know, cars and houses are not as beautiful as they used to be. So it's like, there's a reason, you know, my generation listens to old music, likes old cars, likes old architecture. There's nothing left for us here. So like, that's why I don't blame the lying flat generation in China. Like, yeah, it sucks. You know, I don't want to be a doctor. You know, it's not something that appeals, I think, to anyone, because we realize that that's not where God is. You know, that's not where you got to look at the source, right?
Last question.
Yes, sir. Fellow with the beard?
I think the best way to sum this up is Charlie's going to have a lot more neighbors than Barter pretty soon.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully he uses goals. All right. You think you have any more time? That was a quick one.
One more.
Okay, yes, sir.
MRDP, that's the first time I've heard of that particular stat.
Marginal revenue product of debt, yep.
So that seems interesting.
That's my favorite stat.
I'll have to look into that. So you said since the 2008 financial crisis, there's been low trust, and this has resulted in, you know, you said, for example, increase in homeschooling, like people looking for higher trust communities, which is ironically what we're trying to do. Well, I don't know if that's correct.
Well, there's...
Coincidentally.
Yes.
How would you make a pitch to, like, a local elite, for example? Why should they invest in, like, what we're trying to do?
A local...
Elite?
So, that's a fantastic question. So, wow, that's smart. Well, I think the pitch is, you want someone who's long-term, like a Warren Buffett type, like those guys. So Warren Buffett, in the 1950s, he bought Berkshire Hathaway, this failing company, turned it into his own holdings company, and just invested in the American economy. He went just in everything. You look at what the Berkshire Hathaway holdings are. It's the old Kraft Mac, and you know, everything that's old America. What would be great is to find, if you found one of these types who is truly just these very cutthroat, like cold, pragmatic types who only just look at the dollar sign and the percentage sign. What would be very appealing is to show them, okay, we see what's happening in China. We see what happened. Oh, I'm moving around so much. I didn't. We saw what happened in Japan. Prime example of just debt created. Oh shit. Well, okay. Then China, same deal. They're good for them. They're blowing up their useless infrastructure. Good for them. That's a start. But we can look at these very obvious things where the room to actually grow has been reached, and the MRPD, that's actually a good one to even show them, like, hey, look at what all this debt. Here's something that would actually work. A group of people who solely want to dedicate themselves to their crafts, to their skills, to having a vetting process where they have legitimate, useful people come into their communes or communities or La Cosa Nostra, and essentially what the Amish do, right, with being excellent carpenters. And in that sense, you could probably find plenty of people who would be like, yeah, I'll throw, 10K at that, or 100K, like some angel investor or something, because this is the answer to, oh, I'm going to build another Dollar General. I think they realize there's a lot of very savvy, especially with younger investor types, they would be savvy to this idea. Like, it's I think the exact same mindset that Warren Buffett had after World War II, because it's like, shit, hey, we're going to restart everything. We're the only ones with infrastructure now. Of course I'm going to invest in this, and he went 100% into it. And look, everyone knows his name, and he's a giant billionaire. So that was a great question. Oh, was that an okay answer?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately the pitch would be, I guess, a comparison between us and just the rest of the legacy economy of Dollar Generals and lack of industry in America. And you can sell them, oh, look, the world is truly atomizing and these nations are against each other's throats. Russia feels alone. China is making, harsh decisions to stay alive and also look scared at other nations. It's pretty clear we are in unpredictable times, and they probably will continue. Here's an answer where we have skilled guys, property, resources. This brings actual predictability and sustainability, like a stability that an investor probably would like to invest in.